episode of Ted's Booze Emporium, I guess I'll call this series, where I just review different alcohols, be it spirits, beers, or anything in between. Today we're going to have a very quick review of the Belgian Blonde Ale Vidette. Right, so welcome ladies and gentlemen to a somewhat impromptu episode of the Booze Cellar. Today with me I've got my former USSU bar staff colleague Ben.
Hello.
So basically it's Ben's birthday today. How old he is?
21. 46.
Episode of the Booze Cellar with me, Ted, and my good friend from Berlin, although you wouldn't guess that by his accent, Phil.
Hello.
Yeah, I mean, like, as you can probably tell by his accent, he's distinctively English, but
Hey, I'm half Scottish.
okay, distinctively British. How it's a fruity beer, and how we should dedicate the 50th episode because it's a big occasion. What with it being the 50th episode of the series, to Heineken. Welcome to episode 100 of Ted's Booze Cellar. I'm really not looking forward to today's episode because we're reviewing another drink from Unknown Pleasures, who are a purveyor of pre-mixed cocktail cans, and they're also really shit. So, I'm not looking forward to this. And here we've got Jen's partner, Owen. And it's spelled in the Irish way, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It means John in English.
Wait, actually, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, he's John. He's just an Irish John.
It's just Irish for John.
I'm ashamed myself to be
How do
picking.
you pronounce it properly?
Or
Like that.
Which I don't know whether this is or not, but based on the fact that it's called Rubin, which is the German word for ruby, I'm going to assume it is. It's the closest thing to a red champagne you would ever get. They tend to be quite dry, these alcohols. And but they have a very nice and smooth aftertaste.
So introduce yourselves and also list your favourite alcohol and your least favourite alcohol.
Okay, and you go first because you already know your favourite alcohol, I have to think.
So my favourite alcohol, being a walking talking stereotype, is Guinness. Like quite a way. Second favourite is actually Brennan's, which is another dark.
That's also very, very Celtic.
Yeah, which is very, very nice. Least favourite is Negroni. I think they're horrible, and I think
we're about to drink.
And we'll have one.
No, this isn't a Negroni.
Okay.
But
That's
Negroni.
good.
Hate it.
Okay, I'm Alice, and my favourite alcohol is probably an apple sours because I don't really like alcohol that tastes
That's
like
your
alcohol.
What are you, 14?
I don't like alcohol that tastes like alcohol.
Yeah.
Or
Second favourite's WKD.
or a pina colada.
That's fine. It tastes like.
Aftertaste lingers for so long and it's so unpleasant. It's just got this deep rooted bitterness instead of this bitterness that sort of like coats the aftertaste and sort of leaves it on this interesting little sort of zing of a finish. It just lingers and cloys in your mouth.
Yep. And here we are, 5 years later, hundreds of episodes, and probably a good few hours at least of Ted's Booze Cellar. It's kind of been incredible that I've managed to keep this show going for so long, and I want to say first of all, before we get into the questions, massive thank you to everyone who's been watching me over the years. In the grand scheme of things, I'm still pretty much small fry in terms of YouTube viewing and all that sort of thing. And, you know, when you compare someone like myself who has just over 100 subscribers to, like, say, like PewDiePie, for example, who has over 50 million subscribers, obviously I'm pretty much small fry in comparison to people like that. But I want to still say thank you very much to everyone who has watched or subscribed to me over the years, and massive appreciation to you all. And obviously massive appreciation to everyone who's been sending in their questions for this Q&A video. Now, let's get into the questions. And today, while we're going to be answering these questions, I thought I'd give myself a little treat to have while I'm answering the questions that you guys have all sent in. So, boom, here we are. A nice little mixture box of whiskies that I got from Sainsbury's. We've got here Jim Beam Bourbon, Famous Grouse Standard Variety, the Famous Grouse Smoky Black, and Sheepdog Peanut Butter Whiskey, which I will review properly at some point in the future. It's quite pleasant, actually. Not a standard traditional whiskey, but very good. Let's get into these questions, and yeah, see how we get on. And to everyone at home, thank you for 5 years of goodness, and bottoms up. Now, to start with, I thought I'd begin with the first and so far only video question that I received, which is from my good friend and colleague Luca, and he's given me something to chew on here, so let's take a look and see what he sent us.
Hey Ted, it's Luca from work. I guess my question for your 5th anniversary of your YouTube channel would have to be, which was your favourite video to make, and which one was your least favourite video to make? It's definitely going to be the one that we make. It's going to be a good ass episode.
Alright, so we're starting this off with a drink that's not nearly anywhere near as good as Luca's lovely bottle of Peroni there. We're starting this off with the Jim Beam Bourbon Whiskey. But yeah, that's actually a pretty good and well-rounded question from Luca there, so thank you for sending that in. I would have to say, it's a tricky one in terms of what was my favourite one to make, and it's hard to say because I think it depends on a wide variety of different factors. It obviously depends on how much I enjoyed the drink, as well as also how much I enjoyed my own personal presentation and the way I carry myself in that video. And to be honest with you, I think my favourite ones have tended to be the more recent ones where I've started to implement more editing. I still look on the ones where I don't do any editing with a lot of fondness, because I have to look back in fondness from where I started to where I am now and consider the kind of growth that I've gone through in terms of how I've made these videos and how I've presented myself on this channel over the years. But in terms of the favourite one to make, I think it probably would have to be the Glasgow 1776 video. It's the first one where I properly started implementing editing and used my own sense of comedic intuition to insert extra comedy and extra entertainment into the video after recording. So I'll probably say that one was pretty good, and it was kind of a accidental sort of like labour of love, because obviously the reason why I edited that video down was because partway through the video my dear friend Imogen drank the whiskey a bit too quickly and started going through a real bit of suffering, and so to save her dignity I sort of edited that bit out. But that kind of ended up with me editing a load of the other bits of that video, and what ended up being created was actually quite a humorous and sort of like cheeky video that I actually look on with quite a lot of fondness. So I'd say that's probably my favourite one to make. I also really enjoyed the one on Aaron 18 years single age malt, still consistently the best whiskey I've ever had. Jim Beam isn't quite nearly as bad as Jack Daniels, but it's not as good as Aaron 18 years single age malt. I also really liked the 100 episode special that I did on Mythos, because Mythos is just really nice stuff. And also Old Man Dark Ale by Longman Brewery, just purely because it was just a really, really good beer. Really, really nice stuff. In terms of my least favourite one to make, I don't know. I think the thing is, when you look at the ones where I rated drinks 0 out of 10, like the Carlsberg Special Brew, those ones are bad, but I look still on them with a bit of fondness because they are entertaining to a degree, even though I didn't have a good time drinking those drinks. And so I'd say probably my least favourite one to make, or at least the one I look back on with the least amount of fondness, honestly, is the 200th episode special. I think that was back in season 1 or season 2, I believe. It's just because in that video my energy is pretty low. I keep rubbing my face. It's probably the worst example of a bad episode from back when I didn't do any editing. So I'd say in terms of the ones I have the least amount of fondness for, or that were my least favourite to make, I'd say probably that one, which is a shame because it was actually on a wine that was really, really nice. Now, next up, we have one from my dear old colleague Sammy, who I should keep in touch with more because he is a delight. He asked me, what's your favourite beer out of them all that you have reviewed? And the thing is, at first I did think this was a pretty easy question to answer, but when I think about it, I have actually reviewed so many beers over the years of doing Ted's Booze Cellar that my tastes have changed a little bit over time, and there are a wide variety of beers out there, of course, considering that there's lagers, stouts, ales, porters, IPAs, XPAs, APAs, all that stuff. So there's quite a wide variety of beers to choose from, but considering you're just using the ubiquitous term of beer in general, it's hard to say. If I think about the ones that I have the most consistently positive memories of reviewing and just generally drinking, Mythos is obviously pretty high up there. I think it might have been the first beer that I ever gave a 10 out of 10 to. But when I look back on it now, I think one of my favourites to review was Old Man by Longman Brewery, just purely because it took me by such surprise. Like, it was a beer, I think I reviewed it in draft from Falmer House Students' Union Bar that I used to work at. They just had it on draft one day, and I thought, oh, that looks quite interesting. And I tried a few Longman Brewery beers before that, and they'd all been pretty consistently decent. So I thought, why not? And yeah, I was genuinely really surprised because it was like a perfect blend of like all the things that I like about stouts, lagers, and dark ales all combined together in a way that didn't clash against each other too much. So yeah, I'd say if there's been a beer over the years that I probably have the best and most fondest memories of reviewing, it's probably... Yeah, it probably is like a really, really tough 50-50 tie between Mythos, in terms of if you want something a bit lighter and crisper, and then probably Old Man by Longman Brewery if you want something a bit darker and heavier. Although, to be fair, for a dark beer, it's actually pretty light, and in terms of at least texture and flavour, it's very, very palatable, to be sure. Now, next on the question list, I thought I'd ask one of my dear friend Imogen, and her first question was, if you could only drink the booze of one country for the rest of your life, which country would you choose? This is a really hard one, because there's a lot of countries out there that have really good reputations in terms of booze for different areas and different reasons. I've always found that my favourite wine tends to come from France, but then my favourite beer tends to come from Belgium, my favourite ale comes from probably England, and then my favourite whiskey from Scotland. It's really hard to pin down one. I think obviously if I had to choose one specific country to pick from and just stick to that one, I do obviously have to sacrifice certain things, and so Scottish whiskey or Irish stout or British ale or whatever, really. Really tough one, actually. And it's really tough, actually. I think I do have a real soft spot for British beers, and particularly like dark ales and stuff like that. But I think it's going to be a really close toss-up, honestly. Probably, again, another 50-50 tie between France and Belgium. God, that is really tough. That is really, really tough. I think 49% of me is probably saying Belgium, and then 51% is saying France. The main thing I like from Belgium is the beers. The Belgian beers are, for me, the best in the world. But at the same time, France still has its own selection of excellent beers. It's also got great wines, and I also absolutely love Normandy cider as well. So, yeah, it might have to be France. But a pinch. It is damn close. Now, for the next question, we're going to be taking a look at one from Imogen's boyfriend, Owen, who has asked me, what is the most surprising taste of a drink? From stories about it, the label, smell, look, even the taste being way off. Now, this is a pretty good one, because this is pretty good in terms of being a blanket question. A bit of an easy answer to give, but in terms of a surprising one in terms of how bad it was, I'd say the Bloody Mary by Unknown Pleasures. Pretty surprising in terms of how bad it was, because the thing is, when I reviewed the Sour Gin Vermouth Negroni by Moth, I had already tasted that prior to recording that video, and I already knew it was pretty bad. But with the Bloody Mary by Unknown Pleasures, I had never tasted that, and I think it was only the second ever drink I'd had from those guys. Even though I knew it wasn't going to be great, it still shocked me in terms of just how horrendous it was, and just how, not even just bad, just genuinely unpalatable it was. If I could go back and re-review it, I'd probably give it like a -1 or something out of 10, because it was that awful. In terms of one being surprising in terms of how good it is, I'd say, you know what, Midori actually really surprised me, because I remember being tremendously impressed by the bottle, but the flavour was actually pretty good. I think I gave it something around about a 6 or a 7 out of 10, when I'd expected it to be pretty poor. But it was honestly actually pretty good. It was fairly full-bodied, quite juicy, full of flavour. It wasn't blowing me away, and it wasn't amazing. There was quite a bit that I'd improve about it personally, but I genuinely was surprised by it. I thought it would have been pretty underwhelming and pretty unfulfilling, but it was actually pretty good. I'd also say one that surprised me was the beers by Jebel, the people who do those sort of like cobbler beers. You've probably seen them in places like Sainsbury's and stuff like that. I remember seeing those for the first time and just thinking the cans and the design of the labelling looked really boring and plain. But honestly, the peach Jebel beer and also the elderflower one as well, that one as well, both are really, really nice, really, really good stuff. Same as well for Hiver, at least when I reviewed the beers. Their branding I thought was a little bit dry, at least, but genuinely the taste and the smell of the beers was honestly fantastic, so it really struck me as a good surprise in comparison to the branding. So yeah, I'd say probably those ones are probably the most surprising. I remember one that I did with Imogen and Owen, and Alice and her Owen, and it was the Blue Raspberry AU vodka premix cocktail can. The look of when we poured it into the glass really struck me, and I remember being pretty mortified by just how sheer neon blue it was, and being pretty mortified by that. Yeah, I'd take maybe that one, actually. That was probably the most surprising in terms of general all-round senses and experiences, I'd say, probably. Now, I did message my family to see if they had some questions for me as well, and my mum asked me a couple of good ones. The first one that she asked me was, what's the drink that impressed you the most and the one that impressed you the least? I think the one that probably impressed me the most, and to be honest with you, it probably is still to this day my favourite drink that I've ever reviewed, probably the 18-year aged single malt Aran whiskey. That was just generally just really pleasant to drink. It had a really nicely designed bottle. The smell and the flavour of it was delicious. I'd say that was probably the one that impressed me the most. I would also say that Old Man by Longman Brewery and Mythos also really impressed me a lot as well. I think those are probably the three best drinks I've ever reviewed on the show so far, at least. In terms of the ones that impressed me the least, you know what? Even though the Bloody Mary by Unknown Pleasures and the canned cocktails by Moth were pretty bad, I remember when I reviewed it having just this general sense of contempt for Carlsberg Special Brew. Now, standard Carlsberg is pretty inoffensive in terms of a lager. It's like a 5 out of 10. It's not going to blow you away, but if you want to just get drunk, it's a pretty good bet. But Carlsberg Special Brew was genuinely so awful and so unimpressive that I was dumbfounded by how expensive it was. And so, yeah, even though the Unknown Pleasures and Moth cocktail cans were themselves a bit overpriced, I'd say I had a lot more of an irritated response in terms, well, at least in terms of an internally irritated response to Carlsberg Special Brew, because it was just so awful. It just had such a harsh tone, smell, and just sense about it. Like, none of it felt good. I really, really didn't enjoy it at all. Now, we're going back to another one from our dear old buddy Sammy, and he's asked as well, what's the best place to eat in Brighton? And that's a bit of a hard one. I don't know. It really depends on what you're looking for. I think, really tricky. One of my favourites, and it's easily my favourite place for a good katsu curry or bit of salmon teriyaki or seaweed salad in Brighton, would have to be Shogun Ramen Noodle Bar near the Doc Martens store near the seafront. That's really, really good. The staff in there are lovely. Really good decor. Generally pretty unassuming place. The prices are pretty good. And the quality of food in there is just superb. I think it might have actually been the first ever place where I had seaweed salad. In terms of breakfast and brunchy places, I'd probably say Moksha. I would probably say, because even though they are usually pretty busy and you do have to queue up a little bit, which is a bit annoying, I will say their shakshuka is fantastic. They do some of the best hash browns I've ever had, and their iced coffee is fantastic as well. Plus, they do just a generally good range of different breakfasts and other brunchy bits and bobs. So I'd say they're probably the best place to go for a brunch. Actually, as well, if you do want a brunch to be delivered to you and you don't want to go out somewhere for brunch, Foodillic is really good because they have a selection of vegan and meaty brunches and breakfasts, but they also have this really good thing where you can get a hot meal along with either 2 or 3 salads or like 4 salads in a box. Like, they have a bunch of different box set meals that you can choose from and that you can customize a bit. They're really good if you want like something a bit more breakfasty delivered to you. I would also say, honestly, I know they're a big chain, but I really like Leon. They do some really good deliveries for breakfasts as well, and they're generally a pretty nice place to go and sit in. Oh, I know, my favourite Indian place as well. Now it's Bindi's. That's a really good Indian place. Chinese place, probably, I can't remember the name of it. I think it's called something like China Chef Express or something along those lines. It's just a generally pretty good place. Nice food, not too greasy, really good price. Yeah, pretty good stuff. Really quick delivery as well, actually. I'd probably say my favourite pizza place is probably the Preston Brewery Tap. That's a really good one for sourdough pizzas. But if you want something a bit more Italian-like, I'd say Fatto Mano is really good. Fatto Mano is amazing for pizzas. Fantastic chips as well. Plus, they also have their own some kind of lager, and it is fantastic. But generally, if I had to pick like one place to go and eat that's just the best overall in Brighton, hard to say. Probably choose between either Shogun Noodle Ramen Bar or probably Fatto Mano. One of those two. It's really hard to decide between the two. Oh, I tell you what, having Jib Bean neat It's not as bad as Jack Daniels, but you do need to mix it with stuff. That was pretty horrible. Oh my god. Alright, next up we've got the famous Grouse Smoky Black. Oh, nice. Now, for the next question, we've got one from Owen again. He's asked, what's the max number of shots you do in one episode? Depends. It depends if I'm doing a proper review of something or if I'm doing like a challenge episode. If it's just like a standard review of like, say, like a whiskey or a liqueur or a vodka, I'd probably want to have actually one shot to kind of sip it a few times to sort of like get a proper sense of the flavour, then another shot to sort of like just knock it down in one go, see how it feels to shot it, and then another sipping shot to kind of get more accumulated and accustomed to the flavour. So if it's a proper review, I'd probably say only 3 or 4 tops. It depends. I think if it's like a challenge video, like let's do Q&A and like do a number of shots depending on like how many questions Ted gets wrong or something like that, 10 to 20 or like something like that. And I'd also have to be really careful with what kind of alcohol it is depending on how strong it is as well, because to be honest with you, if it's like schnapps where it's like 15 to 25%, or it's like a weaker vodka that's like around 30 to 35%, or even like sours or something like that, obviously I wouldn't mind doing more shots of it than that. But I think if it's something like really strong, like 60.1% whiskey from the Hinter regions of Cumbria or something like that, then I probably wouldn't be doing like 20 or so shots of it. I'd probably die after 10 or even just 5. But yeah, it depends on the alcohol it is, and I think it also depends on what kind of video I'm doing as well. Next question I've got one from my very, very, very dear friend Trevor, and he has asked, what is the best drink you've reviewed on Ted's Booze Cellar that you didn't try before? To be honest with you, it probably does have to go to Old Man by Longman Brewery, but I would also have to say the 18-year single-aged malt from Aran. The Hive Honey beers, they were really good. I'd never had them before. They really surprised me in terms of how nice they were. Oh, the Peanut Butter Stout by Tailgate Brewery. That, I'd never had that before, and it's probably still to this day one of, if not the best craft brewery stout I've ever had. Now, next up we go to another question from Imogen, who has asked, if you could only drink one cocktail for the rest of your life, which one would you pick? It's a really hard one to say because I feel like there's some cocktails that are really good for summer and really good for winter, and then there's ones that are good for autumn and spring. Oh, it's hard to say. I think just because it's good old reliable, I probably would have to say mojito. The thing is as well, my favourite spirit generally probably is either whiskey or vodka, but mojito is obviously characterised by having white rum in it, so it's obviously a bit of an outlier there. But I genuinely probably would say a nice simple mint and lime mojito is probably a really solid bet for me. I will say, as I'm getting older, I am starting to really like a good Aperol Spritz, just purely because of how simple it is and the fact that it combines flavours that usually you would think don't combine together, but actually do combine together really, really well. Yeah, it's probably mojito, closely followed by Aperol Spritz, and then that is probably closely followed by probably Disaronno Sours. Now, we've got a really good one here from my mum again, which is, what would be your fantasy brew? And I feel like there's a lot more customization that you can do with like the flavors of beer, because we see a lot more varied and different flavors with beers out there, to be honest. So I'm going to pick a beer for this question. I think my ideal beer would probably be, well, there's two I can think of. There would be either the ideal crisp lager that's got a golden hue, a slightly foamy head that's about 1 to 2 centimeters in thickness, golden, sort of like slightly hazy, but like very mildly herbally and aftertaste. So I'd probably say like my ideal kind of like lager at least would probably be something that's kind of like a cross between a Asahi, Mythos, Estrella Galicia, and I've always had a soft spot for the aftertaste of Kronenbourg. So I'd say, yeah, if it's the ideal lager, it'd probably have the main body of a Estrella Galicia, the initial taste of a Mythos, the aftertaste of like a Kronenbourg, and then the underlying sort of flavours and sort of dryness of like a Asahi. probably something like that. In terms of sort of like a darker beer, like an ale or something like that, I would say probably something that has like the main body of Old Man by Longman Brewery, the underlying flavour of a Guinness, the initial flavour of, say, something like actually, the initial flavour would probably have to be from something like Harvey's Best Bitter, and then finished off with the aftertaste of something a bit more chocolatey and sweeter. So probably, again, something like the Tailgate Brewery peanut butter stout. Okay, so next up we've got a question from my sister-in-law, and she's asked your preferred vessel of choice for beer, straight from the can or decant first. To be honest with you, I think it depends on the beer. If you're going for like a cheapo, cheerful beer that you just want to get drunk on for a house party, I'd say, there's no shame in just having it straight out of the bottle or the can. But that particularly applies to things, I think, like, Desperados or Red Stripe. Generally speaking, yeah, if I'm having a beer at home where I've gotten a pack of beers and I've got a nice set of glasses in the cupboard, I will decant them. I've got a few nice beer glasses in the cupboard, actually. I've got one of Heineken, I've got a San Miguel glass, I've got a big Paulaner Munchen glass, I've got Harvey's Brewery, a Titanic Brewery one. So, yeah, it would be a shame not to use those when I'm at home. So, yeah, if I'm at home, yeah, I'll definitely decant it. And especially if I'm round at my mate Big Phil's house. He's a proper Englishman, proper Anglo-Scottish man, and he's very stringent about that. Now, we've also got a double-barreled question here, or really more so just two questions in one go from my colleague Ollie. And the first of his questions is, he wanted to know my process for editing videos. And to be honest, it's really just quite simple and rudimentary. It started from the Glasgow 1776 video when I first properly started implementing editing into my videos, where I just basically thought, here's like a funny moment in the video. What can I do to just accentuate it in a very simple way? And also, just generally speaking, when I do edit a video these days, I more so just want to remove out the bits where I have long pauses that don't really connect anything together, and also, particularly bits where I say or quite a lot. Sometimes I do keep bits where I say and in, but it's more so that I like to remove those bits if I can, or if they don't really add to the moment. And same thing with long pauses. Generally, my approach to editing is just very rudimentary and simple. I just want to accentuate the bits where there's something funny going on, either with basic text editing or just snappy shortcuts. It's just, what do I think in my head is the quickest and simplest way of just accentuating something to make it more entertaining, really. That's basically it. And he's also asked, how do I pick the beers that I review? And again, it's a very rudimentary process, really. I think my main thing is, if I've seen a beer that I have a 50-50 thought that I might have reviewed before, I will look up on YouTube Studio on my channel and see if I have reviewed it before, or if I've reviewed something from that brewery before, as well as also, if it is a drink that I have reviewed before, I will always check to see how long it's been since I've reviewed it. So if it's a certain period of time and I have changed my tastes since that first review, I will really review it. But generally speaking, outside of that, it's very much just a case of, if I come across something interesting I see, I'll just review it. Like the Chalk Ice video I did, what was it? It was the Chalk Ice Stout by Northern Monk that I did recently as of this video coming out. To be honest with you, when I came across that, it was literally just, I saw it in Sainsbury's, I thought, that looks interesting, and I just bought it because it was in a part of the beer aisle in Sainsbury's where there was just a load of weird, crazy stouts for a mainstream corporate, supermarket. So I thought, oh, you know what, that's actually stands out quite interestingly in this place. But yeah, honestly, again, similar to the editing process, it's just very rudimentary, very straightforward, and it's kind of a little bit going off of vibes, but also practicality as well, to be honest. Okay, so for my next question, I've got one from my work colleague and mate Charlie, who has asked what my first proper pint was. And I'm pretty sure, I'm like 99% sure it was Aspel's cider. And it's generally a pretty good cider, quite dry, quite tart. By the sounds of a lot of British ciders, it's quite harsh, but not too harsh, I think. And I'm pretty sure that was like my first proper draft poured pint. I think my first ever beer, I'm pretty sure, was Stella, and I think my first ever cider was probably Bulmers. But yeah, from what I can remember, my first proper poured pint, draft, whether that be beer or cider, was an Aspel's, and I think I mixed it with blackcurrant cordial as well. And then he also asked if I love or hate West Country cider. I think it does depend. There are some good West Country ciders out there. There are some bad ones. I think the more caramelly they are, the better, and they also have to be served ice cold. And I think I generally tend to prefer them either with picnic or to get properly drunk on. They're quite a good drink to get sloshed on, I would say. But I would say generally they're alright, yeah. They're not too bad. I think, you know, there's quite a few ciders from that part of the country that are pretty good. Although I would still say my favourite is definitely Northern French farmer's cider, I'd say. So, yeah, I'd say yeah, sure. West Country cider is pretty good. It just depends, but yeah, generally it can be pretty nice. Alright, the famous grouse smoky black has been well and truly sunk, and now we're moving on to the sheepdog peanut butter whiskey. So, I've actually had this before quite a few times, and I will definitely be reviewing it at some point in the future if I haven't done so already. Now, we're going to be taking a look now at a question from my dear friend Philip, who you guys will have obviously seen on episodes of Ted's Booze Cellar many times in the past, and he was asking, okay, I was wondering what your thoughts are on blended versus malted whiskies, and have you ever tried making your own alcohol, and lastly, what kind of fermentation process is your favourite, and what do you make of the trend of alcohols as investment properties? So there's a good set of questions there. Phil has basically asked 4 in one go. And in terms of what I think of blended versus malted whiskies, I think blended whiskies do definitely have their place. I think they're better mixing in with something. But generally speaking, I do prefer malted whiskies, if I'm going to be really honest. I do quite like heavy malted flavours, I'm not going to lie. And in terms of making my own alcohol, I haven't yet, but I do want to at some point in the future. I really want to try my hand, actually, at slow gin. I imagine that's probably quite a laugh. And I also want to make my own cider at some point. And I also want to try a basic sort of like brown ale at some point as well, maybe. As you guys will have seen in the past, Phil has made his own mead, which we have reviewed on Ted's Booze Cellar before. He's made good mead, and then he made the mead that we tried for Ted's Booze Cellar, which was like a hard 3 out of 10. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't, even by Phil's admission, it wasn't great. But yeah, I think probably for me it would probably be probably slow gin or like maybe cider, I think, to start with at least. And then in terms of fermentation process and what's my favourite, tell you what, even though I probably don't have the patience for it to do it at home, I do find the fermentation and brewing process of whiskey to be really, really fascinating. Just sort of like how lengthy it is and how many sort of individual parts there are to it. But I do also find the process of making a good juniper-based gin really interesting as well. It's, again, quite extensive, but it doesn't take quite as long as a whiskey. Still so many individual moving parts to it. So I'd say probably either a Highland whiskey or a nice juniper gin is probably my favourite way to study the making of alcohol. And then in terms of the trend of alcohols as investment properties, it's a bit of a tricky one, because if you're talking about an alcohol where the brewing process for it has been lost, or it's just so rare that there's literally like only like 400 bottles of it brewed in the entire world, then I honestly do kind of get purchasing alcohol as an investment property and sort of like keeping it and sort of sitting on the value of it. And yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think there's cases where it could be right and cases where it could be wrong. I think, yeah, it's a bit of a grey answer, really. I think, in principle, we do need to be very wary about how we approach it, and we do need to act with a lot of responsibility to make sure that alcohol becomes not so much so that it doesn't become purely a status symbol as a result of high investment, but that it can be a status symbol, a good investment opportunity, and something that we can all still democratically enjoy as much as possible. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think there's I don't know. I think there's benefits and negatives to it, but yeah, it depends on the situation. So, and yeah, if I haven't added in any other questions after this one that I just answered, then I honestly want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to everyone who did send in their questions. And like I said at the beginning of the video, thank you thoroughly to everyone who's been subscribing to me and watching my videos over the last 5 years. It's funny because I remember when I said in the 100th episode special that, you know, I didn't expect to take it this far. You know, keep in mind that was probably only about like a year and a half or so, like a year to a year and a half into my time making Ted's Booze Cellar, and that for me felt like a big hurdle and a big amount of time to take up, dedicating to myself to this kind of thing. But you know, 3.5 years on, like I've done this now for 5 years, and you would think, oh, you know, do you sort of regret spending so much time sort of reviewing alcohol on the internet? And honestly, I don't. Like, it does seem a little bit nerdy. It does seem a bit geeky and nerdy and dorky, but I've genuinely really enjoyed this. It's taught me a lot about the consumption and the brewing and the responsible drinking of alcohol, as well as a number of other things, including taking on positive and negative criticism, video editing, and sort of trying to think in a way where you can express your views in a video entertainingly as well as in an informative manner. So yeah, it's taught me a lot, and I want to continue this for as long as I can, and I think I'm going to try and do this for as long as I can and make as many episodes as I can, because there's still plenty of alcohols out there I've never reviewed, tasted, or even thought about trying, and there's honestly quite a lot of beers that I've done in the past that could do with a re-review, as well as other sorts of alcohol as well. Like, my review of Foster's is utter rubbish, and I really want to redo it. And you know what? I'd really like to re-review Vedette at one point as well, because that was the first beer I ever reviewed. It's the first episode I ever did. And yeah, there's lots of stuff I want to do in the future with Ted's Booze Cellar as well, not just standard reviews. So let me know what you guys want to see in the future in the comment section down below. And as always, do leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe if you did like this video. If you want to see more stuff in the future like this, leave a like. And as well as that, feel free to check out my other social medias in the video description down below, as well as the channels of some of my other mates. And again, honestly, I want to say thank you massively to everyone who has watched this video, as well as all of my previous ones in the past, and who may watch my future videos as well. Thank you, massive appreciation, and here's to another 5 years, and another 5 years beyond that, and another 5 years, etc, etc, etc. To everyone at home, drink responsibly, know your limits, don't do anything I wouldn't do, wash your hands, drink responsibly, and I'll see you guys at the bar next time on Ted's Booze Cellar. Bye-bye for now. Now, I did message my family Great. For now, I'll say I don't mind it, but it depends. Very, very varyingly, if that makes any sense.